I think we'll just give people just a minute or two more to hop on. Looks like we still have some people hopping on, and then I'll introduce Jeff and we'll get started here. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes.
Well, Carla, long time no talk. How are you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Doing great.
Good. Good to see you here.
Yeah, likewise. Looking forward to hearing from you today.
Well, you've probably heard this story a few times in the past, but I appreciate you being here. But I'll probably give you some new details today that you haven't heard.
And great stories are worth retelling.
Hi, Leslie, all the way from Illinois.
Hi, thank you. I'm listening in on behalf of the Illinois Pioneer Coalition because I want to get some ideas. We're thinking of doing the same thing.
Well, you're hearing us talk about all of our weather, which will probably hit you about a day after it hits us, if you're lucky enough to be cold.
It's supposed to be 65 here today, but I think by Friday only a high of 39.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name's Kelly Spar, and I'm the president for the Nebraska Culture Change Coalition, and we're really excited that everybody joined us today. We do these monthly. It's called Coffee with the Coalition, and we have some really great speakers lined up for the next, well, this is our second one out of 12, so for the next 10 months. And so we are just loving that you guys are hopping on and joining us. We want it to be an educational opportunity, but we also want to have some conversation just around the topics that we are presenting, so we can all learn from each other. I think that is the best way to learn and encourage each other, is by having some conversation. So if you are not part of our emailing list, I will put our website in the chat, and you can go to the contact us page and sign up, and you will get these emails that let you know when we're having our monthly coffee with the coalition, as well as any other education that we do. I promise we will not inundate you with emails. We don't send out a ton, but Natalie McCormick does all of our emailing and our website stuff, and she does a great job making sure she reminds everybody of what's going on. So welcome. This morning, we are going to be hearing from Jeffrey Ahl. He is on the Nebraska Culture Change Coalition leadership team, but he is also the founder and principal of arCuretecture, which is an architecture firm here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I know their work is not just limited to Lincoln, so I can let Jeff tell you a little bit about what they do and then share his story. He's got some great stuff to tell us this morning. So Jeff.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I guess I kind of want to start off by setting the table here. I know the intention here is that this is a coffee with the coalition. And so I'm going to propose that we do this in a very casual setting. I have a presentation for this topic that I actually plan to give at the Leading Age Convention next month. So if you want to see much more detail and hear many more of the stories, feel free and get out there and listen to that. But rather than showing you all those slides and running through that, what my hope is that I can kind of spur conversation based on the topics for I guess the research that I did. I am going to tell a couple of the stories, but if at any time you guys have comments, like we were sitting in a coffee house having a conversation, Kelly, like you and Teresa and I did a few weeks ago, I would hope you guys would be willing to just say, hey, Jeff, what's going on here? I'm not going to mute everybody unless we have issues with sound. So just feel free to unmute yourself and talk as you choose. So yes, I am the principal and owner of a firm called arCuretecture. And the very brief story of that is that essentially the firm name arCuretecture is the same word as architecture, but we put the word cure in the middle of that, C-U-R-E. And the C-U stands for culture. The R-E stands for relationships. And that name was developed based off the research that I'm going to talk to you about today that occurred 10, 11, 12 years ago. I'm very passionate about it. I believe in it. And as you can tell, I'm engaged with the Nebraska Culture Change Coalition. I attend seminars all over the country, usually on an annual basis. You know, as we all know, the pandemic kind of put a halt to a lot of that, but I'm getting back into that. And I am very passionate about culture within the homes where we provide care for our elders. But I found that I have to diversify, and I can't just do elder housing. So we do architecture for all sorts of projects, although about 90 to 95% of our work is in elder design, senior living, and primarily now it's independent living is really, or active living is where most of it is going. But we found that our concept of focus on culture and building very strong relationships really works in any industry. So we didn't feel a need to change the name of our firm from arCuretecture. So thanks for the introduction. And as I said, I hope this can remain somewhat conversational. So feel free and ask questions as we come along through this. And I will actually stop at a couple of points and see if there are any questions. So I also will try sharing my screen as I need to. Hopefully this will work well. I believe you're now seeing this slide that says, what is this all about, correct? All right, and I'm going to pop in and out of this, so hopefully I don't mess up along here. It's very possible. But what is this all about? What is culture change? And I'm kind of asking that question. Literally, I'd like you guys to answer. To you, what does culture change represent? Do I have to call names?
No.
I was going to say a change from how we're currently doing things, change for the better.
Yeah, it's a mindset change. Instead of doing things that we've always done, thinking out of the box and finding new ways to do things to enhance the lives of the people that we care for.
It's a paradigm change in the way that people are thinking about changing from this is someone's home. I mean, oftentimes people look at long-term care as their workplace, and instead of looking at it as this is their home and we are guests in their home. So for me, that culture change is shifting that paradigm.
And
So Lori,
how privileged, I was going to say, and how privileged are we to be in their home?
exactly. So Lori, you hit the nail on the head, and really all of you really kind of touched on this, but to me, it is really about what we think and how we think as much as it is what we do. I imagine.
If I may interject, and from what people said, and I think that and having worked with some large corporations over the past many years, the culture change in terms of what we do, and it might be a little bit of a deeper dive into why, why do we do what we do? And that gets into some deeper heartfelt reasons why we do things and how we treat people internally and externally.
Absolutely. So I imagine you guys have all seen this graphic at some point. This is a graphic that I saw show up on Facebook probably 10, 12 years ago as I was developing my presentation. And to me, this really tells the story. These are equal people here. There's no difference between the two. one obviously is older than the other, but when you consider what they're looking at and what they're thinking, how they're reacting and interacting with each other, they're exactly equal to me. And this is, to me, just a beautiful statement of what culture change ultimately is about. This is what we're striving to do, is we're striving to connect to people. And in our world, right, we're connecting to people that are generally elders. But in our world, we connect with people at every level, at all ages. And it's extremely important that we have the ability to connect on almost an intimate level. And that's what I see here. So to me, you know, what is this all about? Well, this is what this is all about. I want to speak just briefly to my mom, who is 87 years old, because she lives next door to me and has lived next door to me for about 10, 12 years. And we talk in our world of elder care about how we treat those people that are older than us, right? And then it's all about putting them first. And yet in reality, when I think about it, my mom needs me really from a physical standpoint. I go change the light bulbs. I mow her lawn. I remove the snow. When she has issues with her computer, I go over and I help her. We play cards together, so we interact, and socially we're there. But she also relies on me emotionally because, as you know, some of the top things that we run into in dealing with seniors is loneliness and boredom, right? And that's my mom, 87 years old, sits at home all day and watches TV, can't wait for Jeopardy to come on, and plays bridge on the computer all day. And then she cannot wait for me or my wife to show up and go over, spend some time with her. It's very important to her. So she expects that we will help her emotionally. Yet in return, my mom supports me emotionally every day in everything that I do. Now, granted, she's my mother versus somebody that I don't know that I'm caring for. But the benefit that I get in having my mom live next door to me is far greater than the benefit that I'm providing her in helping her physically. She can pay for that. Anybody can come over and mow her lawn. It is about the connection. It is about the relationship. And to me, that's where it really comes down to in culture change. And we can do all the things we're supposed to do to treat people right, but unless you're making the connection, I don't know that it's really going to stick. And so that's just the way I look at it. That's my perspective. I'm not trying to tell you that that's the way you should be looking at it, but keep that in mind, if you will, because that's where I've come to as a result of the research. So I'm going to go through here now, and I want to share my screen again. I'm going to give you a kind of a quick, brief overview of my research. Make sure this will work. Okay, so the research. Starting about 2010, I was operational director of operations for a different firm that I worked for at the time. And we had decided to go do some research because we felt as architects, it was our obligation to improve the emotional state of the residents through better architectural design. So we believed the best way to do this is to go out and live in nursing homes as a resident and find out what we could do architecturally to make life better. So we started in Nebraska, and we stopped at 2 locations in Nebraska. And after we went to these 2 locations in Nebraska, I was really kind of challenged as to whether or not I should continue with my research. It was very challenging for me. It was embarrassing. I wasn't comfortable all the time. I know that the providers who were providing care for me weren't always comfortable. And so I went and I spoke with a couple of people up at the gerontology department, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and told them what I was doing. And they kind of encouraged me to keep going. And I want to tell you a story about a time my wife and I were driving to Columbus, Nebraska to attend a band competition, marching band competition for our son. And we were driving up, and as we get to the community where the competition was, we were going to stop and get our classic 2 bottles of Diet Pepsi so we could sit in stands and have something to drink. And I had been telling her the story about the experiences I had had in my first 2 stays, which were a little bit traumatic, but not overly traumatic. We pull up to the gas station, I shut the car off, and I look over and my wife was crying. And I assumed that it had bothered her that I'd been doing this research. And I just immediately said, "Jane, I am so sorry." I said, "As you can tell, it's been a little bit difficult for me, but I'm done. I don't need to do this anymore. I'll just go to the office and say, hey, we've done a couple of trips, but we're done. And she says, no, you don't understand. She goes, I, for the first time now, understand what it was my father was telling me when we moved him into assisted living, when he said, I don't like the way those nurses are treating me. And it was because he was a Methodist minister, a very conservative man, and he thought it just flat out sinful to have a female help him take a bath and go to the bathroom. That's a real deal. And yet he had to deal with it. She then realized, as a result of what I was going through, that this is what he was getting at. And we went and talked to him about it, confirmed that that was the situation. She convinced me that I should continue with my research. So we moved on from Nebraska, moved down to the southeast part of the country, up to the northeast part of the country, back to the southeast part of the country, and then to Illinois. And Leslie, who is on the call here, was somebody that I connected with through LinkedIn, because she does, or was doing, a very similar concept called Through the Looking Glass. And I would encourage all of you to talk to her more about that. And I think she's going to be speaking a little bit about some of the results of that at the Leading Age Convention here coming up next month as well. And I went to 5 states, 7 different locations, and by the numbers, a lot of interesting things. I had 6 physical therapy sessions. I had 7 communities. I took 8 baths. I was there for 14 nights, 21 days. I had 26 transfers in a Hoyer lift, 40 meals, and then this number, 147 different direct care staff took care of me in 21 days. And that was a telling story to me. And I know that we're dealing with the reality of how we have to run a business, which makes it very difficult to have one-on-one interaction. But many of the situations that I ran into had to deal with the fact that every time somebody came in, it was somebody new. And as much as I would try to get to know them and get comfortable with them, it was very difficult to do so. Any questions so far about what it is that I've done and what I've gone through?
Jeff, a quick question. How did you choose or select the states that you conducted this research on? Just at random, or?
No, it wasn't at random. The first 2 that were in Nebraska were clients of mine. So that was a pretty easy ask. And then the others, well, like I said, Leslie Pedke with Aveston in Aveston, Illinois, we connected through LinkedIn. I actually am not sure. I don't remember how that connection occurred, but I think she contacted me. And then the others were kind of a mutual acquaintance from somebody at one of the other facilities that I was at that said, hey, I know somebody down in Alabama. And then I was at a Leading Age convention, and I had some cards, like postcards, and I was just kind of handing them out to people that I met and said, if you would consider allowing us to come do research at your community, let me know. And that's how we got the others. Okay, well, so as I said, go ahead.
I was just going to add, kind of, this is thinking on the other end of the continuum. I have a granddaughter that's I think now day 73 in the NICU, and I spent the day with her and her mom yesterday. But that same concept of how many different nurses and that come through and care for her, and how they all care for them differently. So that to me is just like, okay, now it's on both ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, going back to what I'd mentioned very early on, to me, this really is all about the connection, less about what you do, only because if somebody came in, was talking to me at my level, they understood me, they were concerned about me, I didn't care if they did a lift differently than the next person. It was about the connection. It was about the relationship that really mattered. So that's why that's so important to me.
Jeff, if you would like for me to interject.
Sure.
So I think I had seen what you were doing on LinkedIn, and then let you know that was something that I was actually doing with my own staff. That same type of research, inviting them to move into the nursing home and live like residents. And so then that's how it came to be that then you ended up moving. And I think that if I recall, I had already had one person from outside of our long-term care community move in as part of that same research. And then we invited you to move in as well.
And if I remember right, Leslie, they started survey the day I moved in, right?
They did, yes.
That was interesting. Okay, so ultimately then, our goal was to research architectural elements, right? What could we do? And I'm not going to go through that. That frankly is kind of boring in this situation. But bottom line is we found that that really wasn't the case. So I took a notebook with me. And in that notebook on one page, every time I had an issue, whether it was embarrassment or anger or frustration, I would write down the emotion that I was experiencing and why. And at the end, then I compiled all that information. And if I had 100 issues, which I had far more than 100, but out of 100, what I found was that those that are highlighted now in orange had absolutely nothing to do with an architectural element in a building. Those that are identified with blue did. And so ultimately what you find out is that somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 88, 87% of my issues had nothing to do with architecture and had everything to do with culture and the relationships tied to that. So what we found was that the way you improve the emotional state of the residents was through culture and positive relationships. Probably no surprise to those of you that do this every day, but for an architect moving in thinking I was going to solve all the world's problems by designing a bathroom better, I learned a lot very quickly. So,
Jeff, I have a question for you. This is Christine Stoning. So when you talk about the architecture, what about aesthetics? Was that part of the 100 orange and blue balls we just saw up there? I mean, looking at carpet design, color, paint, I mean, just that overall aesthetics. Was that in consideration, or was it strictly the architecture of the space?
Yeah, it was. And as an architect, when I enter into a space, all those things kind of tie together, right? And so quality interior design is very important. And we now utilize an interior designer to help us with that, to really make sure things are tying together, right? And in certain situations, to make sure we've got contrasting issues that work the way you would want to, so people can see it in lower light. So yeah, those things are important. But the architectural relationships. So for example, one of the places I stayed is I was receiving a bath. The bath aide that was helping me decided they needed to ask somebody a question. So they opened the door from the room that I'm sitting in the bath of, and they're yelling across the hall to people that are eating dinner, asking questions. And there's conversation going across the corridor while I'm in a bathtub naked where anybody could walk in. Those kinds of situations is what I was looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we had 7, 8, or 9 of those, but most of them had, in fact, essentially everything was about culture and relationships. Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a story about a man that I met that was probably one of the most impactful stories. His name is Addie Fleming, and Addie and I met because he happened to be the first place that I went to where I had a roommate. Every place else, I was in a private room. So this, of course, was unique to begin with. And he was recovering from congestive heart failure. So I was in a rehab area. This is in Birmingham, Alabama. And I was there. This was actually the first place where the administrator asked me to essentially lie to the staff and fake that I had had a stroke and that I was paralyzed on the right side of my body, and to have them treat me literally as though I was paralyzed. And I wasn't comfortable with it. And I explained to the administrator that in every other location, everybody knew what was going on. And if they weren't comfortable caring for me, that I would just fall out of character. And he says, well, just give me one day of this, and then on the other 2 days, we'll let you fall out of character. He says, my team's done stuff like this, so they'll be okay with it. And they were, so I did that. But anyway, I move in, and my roommate, Addie, then was not aware of the fact that I really had no issues. But I was in the rehab side, rehabbing from a stroke. would travel down to Alabama from Nebraska. I had the stroke. I was rehabbing, and my wife was going to be flying down on the weekend to pick me up to take me home. That was the story. And he was going to be in rehab 3 to 5 days to remove fluid from his body as a result of dealing with the congestive heart failure. And his wife lived in an assisted living room that was in the building adjacent to the one that we were in. Well, the first night that we were there, really, it was very limited sleep. He was dealing with tons of discomfort. He basically slept sitting up. And as you can imagine, somebody that has a lot of fluid, he was coughing, it was very raspy. He was swelling, and he was very agitated. So as you can imagine, I got about as much sleep as he did. However, by the morning, medications had worked, and it was really like a new day for him. The fluid had left his body, and he felt amazing. And he was up and around. I remember him crawling on the floor to plug in his phone to charge it, which, by the way, is one of the architectural things we decided we need to do, is to make sure that people have the ability from their bed to plug things in and to leave things near them, because that's the lives we live now, right? Our electronic devices are important. Well, that day, I went to physical therapy, which is actually a very interesting situation, because I was in a physical therapy room with about 15 other people, which I think is kind of frowned upon rather than individualized physical therapy. But from a relationship standpoint, we had fun. It was like a group of people getting together to play games, and nobody wanted to leave when it was done. So there were some really fantastic positive elements there. I didn't do a lot of physical therapy, but it was great to get to know people. That interaction was really positive. Well, when I returned, I ended up walking in on Santa Claus in our room. And I'm referring to him as Santa Claus because that is exactly what he looked like if he was out of costume. His name was actually Reverend Friday. He was from Oklahoma. And as it turns out, Reverend Friday was mentored by my wife's father, who was a Methodist minister in Oklahoma when he first started his career. So very small world situation. But in the middle of our conversations, he had to leave the room because they were going to check a catheter that Addie had. And so they asked him to leave the room. He just said, well, can I pull the curtain and talk to Jeff? So we start talking, and he starts telling me about how I really needed to get to know Addie. He says, you need to know this man. He is an amazing man. And so I'm going to reintroduce you to him, and I'm hoping that the next day you get to know this guy. So we did. The curtain opens, and Reverend Friday reintroduced me to Addie. And in the next few hours, we really began to become friends. So we spoke of his life, his college. He was a professor. Talked about some patents that he actually received while he was doing work with the University of Nebraska on East Campus. He knew people from East Campus that I didn't know, but he was pretty active at the University of Nebraska. Talked a lot about the Auburn-Alabama rivalry because Reverend Friday was an Alabama fan and he was an Auburn fan. We talked about Nebraska football. And then we talked about his wife and their marriage. And Addie always brought everything back to a relationship. When he was talking about Reverend Friday, it was about the relationship he had with Addie. He always talked about the relationship with the professors and the people he worked at the University of Nebraska. And when he talked about his wife, this is where I really began to understand who Addie was. He told me about the story of their engagement. And on their engagement, they went down to the courthouse to pick up their marriage license. And on that day, he says, I will never forget. Back in those days, you would just drive down to the courthouse. We ran in, we came out of the courthouse with the sheet of paper, and my wife and I were dancing in the courthouse lawn. We were so excited to be engaged, and we've been married ever since. And it's been an amazing marriage. And here was the unique thing about the relationship that I've tried to learn from in my relationships since then. He said that they were both problem solvers. They were both professors. They were both very good at problem solving. And so they almost looked forward to times when they had disagreements, because they would use it as a way to build the relationship by solving the problem. The issue was never about the individual because they loved each other. The issue was about a situation, and they found ways to work together to solve these problems, which is, I think, unique in most relationships. Most relationships, we tend to find an issue and it's a wedge, right? And we put it between us and we find a way to make the issue worse or blame the other person for it. And yet he told me that except for just a few occasions, he and his wife had found a way to build in that relationship. And he continued to stress the importance of relationships in everything that he had done. Well, that night we're eating dinner and the stories continued. And about that time, the ladies came to take me down to give me my bath that night. And I said to Addie, I said, well, make sure you finish up dinner tonight. And if you'd like my pudding, you could have my pudding. And he says, oh, chocolate pudding. It's my favorite. If you don't mind, I'll have your chocolate pudding. And I said, absolutely. So off I go. I take my shower. It's probably gone 15, 20 minutes. I come back and we enter the room and Addie had passed away. So we found him dead, and they wheeled me across the hall and put me in the vacant room across the hall, turned on the TV, and the show Storage Wars is on. And that's why I call this story Storage Wars, because for the next 4 hours, I sat across the hall and I thought about Addie Fleming, and I thought about relationships. So as you can see here, it must have been that I was there Wednesday night, December 14th, 2011 is the day that he passed away. And I found this obituary, received the approval to utilize it in my presentation. And so I do. And this is one of the stories that I have related to the research that I did. And like I said, I've probably got a good 15, 20 stories like this that maybe aren't quite as impactful on my life as some of the others. But I cannot impress upon anybody that I'm dealing with, whether it's in elder care or personal lives, that relationships are so important and they're so valuable. And I think it is a travesty that we treat relationships with such little regard anymore. And if we want to change culture, I think this is where we need to go, is to find ways to continue to improve relationships and make them positive. So I guess I would open it up at this point, see if there are any other questions or thoughts that you would have at this point.
Jeff, this is Artis. I really grabbed onto your culture in this presentation, and I come from an experience of working in nursing homes as a food service director for over 20 years. And one thing I learned quickly is every day a person's day can go bad. Their medications can be late. They can't get their bed on time. They didn't get their call light answered in time to go to the bathroom. There's a lot of issues. But what happens is people have control over their food. And so the complaints are focused on food. I had an amazing staff. I ran multiple sites, but my favorite staff was in a 99-bed facility. And we had 3 wings. And my staff, I'd come back and I'd say, well, you need to chop the meat up for 304 or whatever. I need extra fluids for this person, or can you do this for their tray? And my staff would be like, there's more things she wants me to do. And then on the other side, the patients would be, or residents would be complaining about, why did he, taking it personally, we missed a dinner roll or something like that. Like, they don't like me, you missed my dinner roll. So what I did in culture, I didn't think it was innovative at the time, but I had 3 shifts, I had 3 cooks, and I had 3 wings. So I assigned each cook a wing and a meal. And before they broke down the tray line, before they did anything, when that last tray went out, they went out to their wing and they did room visits. And within the first 48 hours, everything changed. They saw the person that had the rotacuff tear, and that's why they needed their meat chopped up, because their arm was in a sling. They saw the poor dental care. They saw the frailties or just the persnicketiness of a patient, but they got to bond with them. My complaints went to 0. My cooks loved going out to see everybody. And it really built that cultural relationship that you're talking about between my staff and the residents. And I would always reinforce to my team, if you have a horrible day, if you burnt the cut toast, the oatmeal didn't taste right, I will back you up. But when you're helping the resident, you know, do it. You know, every
Mhm.
day at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd get that coffee clutch group that would wheel into the dining room because they knew the kitchen was being opened. And my team would go out there, know who took sweet and low, know who wanted a graham cracker, know who wanted tea versus coffee versus decaf. They took care of all those residents. It came to be about 20 people while everything was heating up. That was I said, that's your job. This is their home. That's what they want. And it really built a really good relationship so that our team knew, and the nursing staff, not that I like to bash on the nursing staff, but the nursing staff would get mad because they'd come in and say, I need an orange juice for 104. And I'd say, well, who is 104? Well, I don't know, 104, they need an orange juice. I'm like, no, I need their name and their diet order. Well, and I'd say, look, if you can clean their butts, you could tell me their name. And they'd get mad at me for that pushback. But I'm like, no, my crew know who, and Ernie would say, 104 is Gladys, Miss Gladys. Miss Gladys, I forgot her orange juice. Don't worry about it. I'm on my way out there. I'll go take her orange juice out to her. And so I think that's part of this residential culture. And I applaud you for looking at your research a different way. I haven't been in the nursing home environment for a good bit now, but I always loved it because you learned, again, like Addie's history. I had the privilege of meeting a Spanish American war veteran, was one of my residents. I worked at the VA Long Beach, and we had a 99 pad over there. You meet the most amazing people that you don't realize have these amazing histories. And I always told my family, if I ever am in a nursing home, I want you to have my party pictures all over the place to show that I was a partier. I want the party pictures around my bed. And with that, I'll turn it back.
Artist, that's excellent information. First of all, I want to respond here. Barb, you'd asked me in chat how long I'd been in each place. I stayed 2 nights and 3 days is the way it worked at each location. Artist, to your point, here's something that I found really interesting. So again, I stayed at 7 different locations, and I stayed at a couple classic traditional nursing homes. And I'm using that word on purpose because that's the way they felt and operated. However, one of them had an amazing culture, and it didn't matter that I was in a nursing home. It was the way people treated me. I also stayed in some amazing places, some that I was in that would be along the lines of what you've heard of with a greenhouse, although it wasn't a greenhouse, but it was incredibly apportioned space. And its culture was phenomenal as well. In fact, some of the stories that I tell about, you hear the thing of that's not my job. And there's whole sayings around how people come into things and say, well, that's not my job. That's not what I do, where they had abolished that thought process. So I had a physical therapy person that was giving me a bath, and I had a nurse's aide that was helping with some of my dietary stuff. And it didn't matter what the role was that needed to be done. In fact, the RN was vacuuming the floor. So it was incredible stories of people that we walked into that particular home and it just felt like you were at home. Whatever needed to be done, people just did it, right? So it was a culture. And while that culture worked best for me, while I was sitting in a nursing home, especially the one that had this amazing positive culture, I was okay with it. That didn't really bother me. And it was because of the people. I will, and I'm picking on Leslie a little bit here, but I can tell you that when I went there was a situation in their commons area where 2 men were having a fight. They were both in a wheelchair, but they were kicking each other and grabbing the wheelchair and trying to pull one over on another one. And she had an employee there that came over and handled it with such grace that it was like, I don't know how that worked, but she sat down between them and began a conversation between them. She understood who these people were based on the culture that they had there. And she was able to get these men to settle down, shake hands, and start having a positive conversation again, right? And in most places many of the places, but probably most of the employees would have probably taken the one wheelchair, wheeled it around a corner so they couldn't see each other, and just say, hey, out of sight, out of mind, the problem goes away. And then from my perspective, it's like, well, that's how we would treat a 3-year-old, but it's not how we treat an adult. Let's have a conversation. Let's work through an issue. So, I learned so much, and I consider myself very fortunate to have gone to 7 different places in 5 different states, because the cultural culture was so significantly different in Alabama than it was in Ohio versus Illinois and Nebraska. Right? It's very fascinating. I learned so much. It was a great experience. I kind of put this presentation on the shelf because I felt like I'd given it to everybody about 10 years ago. I went around throughout the Midwest and kind of gave this presentation. And then when I was talking to Natalie and Kirsten about it, it's kind of like, you know what? My guess is most of the people providing care haven't heard the story, or they've moved on and done something else. So it's going to be a new story. So I'm excited to kind of pull it back out and start over.
Yeah, I have a question for you. With the relationship that you made with Artie, and going to go take a shower bath and coming back to the room, and he had died, and they put you across the hall for 4 hours. How did that make you feel about that whole process? And the reason why I ask is I think this is an area that we as long-term care providers could improve upon with the grieving process and our residents.
That's a really good question, Teresa. And I don't know that I honestly remember how I felt in the moment. I do remember when we came back to the room that I was ready to start engaging with Addie again, right? And when the door was open and we noticed that, it was a shock. And it was a loss, maybe a little bit. I mean, we weren't real close friends, but then being in the room across the hall, I do remember thinking, well, this isn't a good thing to do. I'm dealing with a little bit of trauma. And if he was really a friend of mine, it would be a fair amount of trauma. And now I'm over here while they get the coroner to come in and write up papers and move them out and clean up and get everything done. And it was an odd situation, yes. But I remember turning the TV on and all I could think of was, what did I just learn from Addie? Right. So that's really where my thought was.
Jeff, can I add to that? Or sorry, Teresa, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so many times I think we also view death as, at least similar to your situation with the 2 gentlemen fighting. Well, let's separate them, move them around the corner, out of sight, out of mind. But our residents develop deep relationships with each other. And, when I was actively an administrator years ago, that was something that we implemented at our facility, is a memorial service at our own community. Because these are people, they do have relationships, and they're going to go through the grieving process like everyone else. And so I appreciate that perspective. And I was thinking, maybe we should have asked, what do you want to do? Do you want to stay in the room? Do you want to go across the hall? What do you want to do? And so I just found that very interesting. Those are some of the thoughts that went through my mind. Oh, I'm done, Leslie.
That a similar situation to what Jeff had happened to him happened to me. I had moved into our nursing home, and we had just, like everybody in our hallway, had just gone to bed, and I was laying there in bed, and my suite mate passed away. And I knew that that time was coming. I knew that his daughter was there. And all of a sudden I heard her start crying. And I assumed what had just happened. And I was in my pajamas. I was the nursing home administrator and I was in my pajamas, and I got up and I went into the room and I consoled her, but no one else did. And I found that to be really interesting, that no one else that lived there. I knew everyone was probably still awake because we had all just gone to bed. We'd all finished watching the Cardinal game, and no one else got up. And it brought flashbacks to me back to a conversation that I had with a gentleman living there whom I had a very close relationship with. And he spoke to me just a few weeks prior to that about death and how he was afraid of dying. And I think as long-term care professionals, we have this assumption that if a person is 95 years old and living in a nursing home, then they kind of obviously know their fate, right? And they know that they're probably going to pass away in the nursing home. There's no intention of them going home. And I remember that conversation that I had with him. He really wanted to talk about death and dying, and the fact that many of his suite mates that he lived near on his hallway had passed away. And he had said to me, "What if I'm next?" And I chuckled and said, "What do you think? Death is contagious?" And he said, "What if it is?" And it kind of brought it. It really made me self-reflect, like, we shouldn't, again, as long-term care professionals, just assume that because a person is living in long-term care and they're elder, that they have accepted that death is coming. And so that, again, that conversation really came flooding back to me that night that my suite mate died. And as a young person living in the nursing home, it did make me feel a little bit like, gosh, I got to get out of here. And I got to get back to my job, because, I mean, as silly as it may sound, but it made me think, geez, I don't want to be that next person. And so it really made me think about, is that how they all feel? And so, as you were saying, Teresa, we do need to be a lot better about how we handle death and dying in the nursing home, and being more open and allowing people to come in and pray with someone as they're passing away, and being more open with the people that live there, that, hey, their roommate just died, or they come to the dining room the next morning for breakfast and someone's no longer sitting there, and we feel like that we can't tell them because of HIPAA. But even taking that as peeling back that layer even more and talking to people openly about death and dying, and I'm really helping them face their fears about it.
Thank you. That is awesome. Both of you. Any other questions or comments?
Mike has his hand up.
Oh, he sure does.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
First of all, we are in the technology business. We offer a platform called View 360 Senior Care Management, and we have modules in terms of inventory and scheduling and programs and HR, grant management, workforce, donor information, do a lot of marketing analytics, et cetera, et cetera. And in a sense, I mean, how we do that is we, bear with me 1 second. We interact with a number of back-end systems that many of you are familiar with, like, Point Click Care and Matrix Care and Yardi and Eldermark and Vitals, AHT, Kronos, and 15, 20 others. And then we, in some cases, aggregate data and enable our clients, our senior care providers, to look at their entire operation through a different set of lenses. We've worked across verticals for quite a long time. So we've worked with Gallup and Blue Cross and Warner Enterprises, and we're based in Omaha. So locally, I mean, these are all names that a lot of you are familiar with. But 7, 8 years ago, we installed a pretty large system at Tabitha. And Christine Schoening was one of the senior executive, and I'll say architects of this, but it was a very, very technical system. And I remember the first couple of meetings, and we ended up winning an RFP. We were selected via RFP process. And the first couple of meetings, I mean, very technical. I mean, we had a half a dozen people in the room, you know, from each organization and technology. Well, second meeting, Christine and one of her colleagues came in, and it was Lisa Osborne. And as we were talking about this technology, Christine said, you know, let me paraphrase this. It's kind of like CRM with a heart. And that kind of changes it. It gave us, this is why we're in the technology business. This is CRM with a heart. And it gave everybody kind of that jolt that said, why do we do things? You know, and interestingly, and we're members of Leading Age Nebraska. We were at the conference in Denver, the Leading Age National Conference, et cetera, and have met with Christine and her folks and Natalie and Kirsten quite a bit. And we're actually working on a module now. And Christine, I hope you didn't trademark that title, CRM with a heart, because I think that's what we're going to call it. But the purpose is, and I'm going to just read this, are we accomplishing our mission through the lens of our residents? And a way to gauge much of what you're talking about today through the lens of the people sitting in that bathtub with no clothes on and having the door open. I mean, and how do you, and it's a matrix. And I have a copy of a matrix that we're actually doing for a social services agency, and it's part of an intake form that, so, I mean, if you can imagine, you know, maybe 12 categories on the left and a scoring system on the right, and then a crossfoot, but something that is a continuum that can be measured. And it really is, how are we doing in our mission that says we have a system here, it's a CRM system with a heart. And how do our clients, how do our residents, are they happy, and are they, and certainly measuring that. But a lot of this is a great presentation, and how can technology feed into just exactly what you're talking about? And anyway, I just want to throw that out, and we're gonna be lining up some meetings in Lincoln, and Christina, we'll talk soon, but you know, hopefully your place, or Natalie and Kirsten and Jeffrey, I mean, this is really,
Yeah, absolutely.
really good.
I don't think Mike will ever forget that comment, you guys. But no, it wasn't. It was, yeah, there it is, Mike.
Where I wrote down literally what you said.
That's right. That's right. We were just in a state that we were growing very rapidly at the time. And I had, I think, a team of like 25, 30 navigators, and we just simply could not keep up. And we were processing referrals and intakes and hospital calls and rounds and doctors. And we just had to have something in place that gave my team hope as well. Hope for better things, right? Hope that we knew our people, even if that was 20% of the time, that when we opened up the modules, that we had our information in there that told the story about the person. And so it was a really, really good project. And Teresa, to your comment, your sister and I, at one point, I think we had one individual at the time, all double rooms. I think she was there long-term care for 5 years. And your sister and I think we counted like 21 different roommates. And I think a substantial, over 80% roommate turnover due to death versus move out. And it is very impactful, right, on how we do that process and let them have that involvement when there's a death and so forth. But I appreciate your comments on that as well.
I was just gonna say too, such great information, and the stuff that we learned last copy of the coalition and stuff that we learned today and we'll learn through the next several months doesn't just apply to long-term care facilities. I mean, there's a lot of people that are on this call that are in home care and hospice and, you know, other avenues of patient care. And so it's really great that we can have education and stories that can impact all levels of care, because that's super important, because we're all doing the same thing, just maybe a little different way. And you know, we can take this information. I'm a home health care provider, so I can take this into the home and apply it just as easily as we could in a long-term care or, you know, anything like that, assisted living, you know, independent living, whatever. So this is great. Thanks, Jeff.
You bet.
Andy, I'm with St. Croix Hospice. And Kelly, it's actually ironic that you mentioned that, because as I was listening, I was just thinking to myself that at some point when I, you know, take my turn to present from my perspective in hospice, one of these months here, I've already determined that there's so many different things. I'm almost glad I didn't go first. I guess what I'm saying is because there are certain little pieces and perspective that I'll take from each of yours who have come before me that I think are important, and that I can add to, you know, what I had already planned to speak about. So to your point, Kelly, I would agree.
Yeah, and that's something that we as the Nebraska Culture Change Coalition have decided to really focus on this next year, is expanding a lot of our grant work and stuff that we do. It only works for long-term care, you know, it's CMP funds, and so we can't always offer that to other levels of care. But as a coalition, we want to collaborate with every level of care, and state surveyors and ombudsmen and, you know, whoever we can to kind of bridge those gaps and make those relationships so that we can all, you know, just provide better care, better culture, better, you know, everything for these folks that are entrusting us to care for them. So it's our commitment as a coalition to really include lots of different levels of folks, and anybody and everybody that's kind of in the playing field. So if you guys know people that you think would be beneficial to, I mean, we need speakers for these things. We need, you know, members, anybody you want to add to our email list, just, you know, feel free to reach out and let us know. And we'd be excited to have absolutely anybody. So anything else before we depart? Jeff, thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure. I enjoyed doing it and dusting it off and re-looking at things. I was kind of funny how much I had forgotten about some of these stories, but it was fun to get back into it, and I've really enjoyed it. So
Just exceptional. Thank you, Jeff.
you bet.
All right, everyone, have a great day, and we'll see you next month. We'll also send out the recording in case there's someone else that you want to share it with. Feel free to use it anywhere you want. It'll also be on our Facebook page. So, okay.
Sounds
Take care,
good.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.